Imagine a kingdom fractured by rivalry, where cousins wage war and noble houses battle for the crown. The Wars of the Roses, a brutal civil war, pitted the Lancastrian and Yorkist branches of the Plantagenet dynasty. Symbolized by red and white roses, against each other. For over 30 years, England descended into chaos, with shifting allegiances fighting for the throne. This dynastic struggle reshaped the monarchy and nation. In this video, we'll uncover the origins of this conflict, exploring fragile reigns and simmering tensions that ignited a war for England's crown. Welcome to the War Vault. The Wars of the Roses, 145, 51, 48, 7 were a series of civil wars that tore England apart. Rooted in dynastic disputes, political instability, and a fractured nobility. This conflict between the houses of Lancaster and York, both branches of the Plantagenet family, was not merely a fight for the throne, but a struggle for England's future. The seeds of this war were sown in the weak reign of Henry VI. The fallout of the 100 Years' War and the ambitions of rival factions, setting the stage for decades of bloodshed and betrayal. The houses of Lancaster and York descended from Edward III, whose prolific lineage created competing claims to the throne. The Lancastrians, symbolized by the red rose, traced their line through John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, whose son Henry IV seized the crown in 1399. The Yorkists, bearing the white rose, descended from Edmund of Langley, Duke of York, and Lionel of Antwerp, giving them a potentially stronger claim through a senior line. Complex inheritance laws and feudal traditions left these claims ambiguous, fueling tensions as both houses vied for legitimacy. The reign of Henry VI, a Lancastrian who became king in 1422 at 9 months old, was a catalyst for conflict. Henry grew into a pious but ineffective ruler, plagued by mental instability, possibly inherited from his French grandfather, Charles VI. His bouts of catatonia and indecisiveness weakened royal authority, creating a power vacuum. The nobility, accustomed to strong kings like Henry V, grew restless, and factionalism flourished as magnates sought influence over the crown. The 100 Years' War with France compounded England's woes. Decades of conflict drained the treasury, and defeats like the Battle of Castillon in 1453 ended English hopes of retaining French territories, save Calais. These losses tarnished Henry VI's reputation, as nobles and commoners alike blamed the crown for military failures. The war's economic toll, taxation and disrupted trade, fueled discontent, while returning soldiers, often unpaid, added to domestic. Queen Margaret of Anjou, Henry's French wife, emerged as a formidable figure amid this turmoil. Fiercely protective of her husband and their son, Edward of Westminster, Margaret rallied Lancastrian loyalists to secure the dynasty. Her assertiveness, however, alienated many nobles who viewed her as an outsider, meddling in English affairs. Her rivalry with Richard, Duke of York, became a flashpoint. York, a powerful magnate with vast estates and a claim to the throne, positioned himself as a reformer, criticizing Henry's corrupt advisors and seeking the role of protector during the king's mental collapses. York's ambitions clashed with Margaret's determination, splitting the nobility into factions. The Lancastrians, centered on the royal court, drew support from northern and western lords, while the Yorkists, backed by southern and eastern magnates like the Nevilles, gained traction among those disillusioned with Henry's rule. This polarization turned political disputes into armed camps, with personal loyalties and regional rivalries amplifying the divide. The First Battle of St. Albans on May 22, 1455, marked the war's outbreak. Richard of York, allied with the Neville family, led a force against a Lancastrian army under the Duke of Somerset. The brief but bloody clash in the streets of St. Albans saw Yorkist victory, with Somerset and other Lancastrian lords killed and Henry VI captured. Though small in scale, the battle set a precedent for violence, shattering the veneer of political negotiation and plunging England into civil war. The Wars of the Roses were not just a dynastic feud, but a broader struggle over governance and power. Feudal loyalties bound nobles to their lords, but personal ambition and survival often dictated alliances. The war's early phase saw noble families like the Percys, Lancastrian, and Nevilles, Yorkist, vie for regional dominance, turning local rivalries into national conflicts. The common people, though not primary combatants, suffered from pillaging, taxation, and disrupted trade as armies lived off the land. The conflict's roots lay in England's evolving political landscape. The monarchy's dependence on noble support, coupled with weak leadership, exposed systemic flaws. The loss of French territories shifted focus inward, intensifying domestic power struggles. The war also reflected broader medieval trends: the decline of feudalism, the rise of professional armies, and the growing importance of parliamentary authority, as nobles sought to legitimize their actions through legal claims. Key figures shaped the war's early years. Margaret of Anjou's fierce leadership galvanized the Lancastrians, but her uncompromising stance deepened divisions. Richard of York's bid for power, initially as protector, evolved into a direct challenge for the throne, setting a precedent for later Yorkist claims. The Act of Accord in 1460, naming York heir over Henry's son, briefly eased tensions, but enraged Margaret, ensuring continued conflict. The Wars of the Roses were a crucible for England's identity, testing its resilience amid chaos. The war's brutality, executions, attainders, and battlefield slaughter reflected the stakes, not just a crown, but control over a kingdom's future. As the conflict escalated, it drew in entire noble families, with shifting alliances and betrayals becoming hallmarks of the era. The stage was set for a series of dramatic battles that would define the war. The First Battle of St. Albans was a prelude to larger clashes, where military prowess and political maneuvering would determine England's fate. The war's early years highlighted the fragility of royal authority and the power of noble factions to shape history. Join the War Vault for Part 2, where we'll explore the bloodiest battles, Towton, Barnet, and Tewkesbury, and the rise of pivotal figures like Edward IV and Warwick the Kingmaker. Follow this saga of ambition, betrayal, and redemption as we unravel the Wars of the Roses. The Wars of the Roses, 1455-1487, escalated from dynastic rivalry into a brutal civil war that convulsed England for over 3 decades. Marked by ferocious battles, shifting allegiances, and relentless ambition, the conflict between the houses of Lancaster and York reshaped the nation. Key engagements like Towton, Barnet, and Tewkesbury, alongside betrayals like figures like Warwick the Kingmaker, defined this chaotic era. The war not only determined England's monarchy, but also transformed its social and political fabric, setting the stage for a new order. The First Battle of St. Albans in 1455 ignited the war, with Yorkist forces under Richard, Duke of York, defeating Lancastrians, capturing King Henry VI, and killing key nobles like the Duke of Somerset. This victory, though small, shattered hopes of peace, plunging England into turmoil. The fragile truces that followed, like the Act of Accord 1460, naming York heir, were undermined by Queen Margaret of Anjou's refusal to cede her son Edward's claim. Her defiance ensured the conflict's continuation, with both sides rallying armies and fortifying strongholds. The Battle of Towton, fought on March 29, 1461, was the war's bloodiest clash and a turning point. Edward, Earl of March, son of the slain Richard of York, led a Yorkist army of around 40,000 against a slightly larger Lancastrian force loyal to Henry VI in Yorkshire. A blizzard raged, obscuring visibility and complicating tactics. Yorkist archers, aided by wind-driven arrows, gained an early advantage, while fierce hand-to-hand combat defined the day. The Lancastrians broke under relentless pressure, with thousands slaughtered in the rout, estimates ranging from 20,000 to 28,000 dead. Edward's victory paved the way for his coronation as Edward IV, establishing Yorkist dominance. Towton's scale devastated northern England, depleting noble families and ravaging communities. The battle's brutality, executions of captured leaders and mass graves underscored the war's stakes. It consolidated Yorkist power, forcing Henry VI and Margaret into exile in Scotland. But Lancastrian resistance persisted, fueled by Margaret's indomitable will. She rallied support abroad, securing French aid and northern lords to continue the fight. The war's complexity lay in its political maneuvering and betrayals. Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, dubbed the Kingmaker, was pivotal. Initially Edward IV's mentor, Warwick's influence secured Yorkist victories. However, tensions arose over Edward's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville, a commoner, which alienated Warwick and other nobles. Warwick's ambition and grievances led him to defect to the Lancastrians in 1470, forging an unlikely alliance with Margaret. He orchestrated Henry VI's brief restoration, the re-adeption, exposing the fragility of Edward IV's rule. Edward IV, exiled in Burgundy, returned in 1471 to reclaim his throne, leading to the decisive battles of Barnet and Tewkesbury. On April 14, 1471, the Battle of Barnet saw Edward confront Warwick's forces in dense fog near London. Confusion and a Lancastrian betrayal led to Warwick's defeat and death, crippling the Kingmaker's influence. Weeks later, on May 4, the Battle of Tewkesbury in Gloucestershire sealed the Lancastrian fate. Edward IV's army crushed Margaret's forces, killing her son, Edward of Westminster, the Lancastrian heir. This loss shattered the Lancastrian cause. Henry VI, captured in London, died soon after, likely murdered, in the Tower of London, ending the direct Lancastrian line. These battles reshaped England's political landscape. Barnet and Tewkesbury eliminated key Lancastrian leaders, securing Edward IV's reign until his death in 1483. However, the war's undercurrents persisted. Edward's sudden death left his 12-year-old son Edward V as king under the regency of his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Richard's seizure of the throne as Richard III, declaring his nephews illegitimate, reignited tensions. His controversial reign, marked by suspicion and rebellion, set the stage for the war's final act. The Wars of the Roses were not just military clashes, but a societal upheaval. The feudal order, reliant on noble loyalty, buckled under the strain of factionalism. Noble families like the Percys, Nevilles, and Courtenays were decimated, with estates confiscated through attainders and redistributed to loyalists. The war's chaos empowered new elites, like the Woodvilles, while weakening traditional magnates. Commoners, though not primary combatants, endured economic disruption as armies plundered crops and towns, and heavy taxation funded campaigns. Militarily, the war reflected medieval warfare's evolution. Battles relied on longbows, poleaxes, and armored men-at-arms, but gunpowder artillery, used sparingly at Towton, hinted at future changes. Armies were raised through feudal levies and private retinues, with nobles like Warwick maintaining personal forces. The war's brutalities, executions, and battlefield massacres reflected its personal stakes as families fought for survival and honor. Politically, the war exposed a monarchy's dependence on noble consensus. Edward IV's charisma and military success restored stability, but his reliance on favorites like the Woodvilles sowed discord. The war's fluidity, with rapid shifts in power, highlighted England's fragmented governance. Parliaments, increasingly involved in legitimizing claims, foreshadowed their growing role in national politics. Culturally, the Wars of the Roses left a lasting imprint. The conflict inspired literature, from chronicles to later works like Shakespeare's history plays, which dramatized figures like Richard III and Henry VI. The red and white roses, though later symbols, became emblematic of England's divided identity. The war's devastation spurred calls for unity, shaping national consciousness as England emerged from feudal fragmentation. The Wars of the Roses were a crucible for England's transformation. Battles like Towton showcased the conflict's ferocity, while betrayals like Warwick's revealed its volatility. The elimination of the Lancastrian line at Tewkesbury seemed to end the struggle, but Richard III's usurpation ensured its continuation. The war's social and political shifts laid the groundwork for a centralized monarchy, setting the stage for a dramatic resolution. Join the War Vault for Part 3, where we'll explore the Battle of Bosworth, Henry Tudor's rise, and the birth of the Tudor dynasty, concluding the Wars of the Roses. Follow this saga of ambition, betrayal, and rebirth as we uncover England's path to a new era. The Wars of the Roses, 1485-1487, a brutal struggle between the houses of Lancaster and York, culminated in the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, a clash that ended decades of civil strife and birthed the Tudor dynasty. The defeat of Richard III, the last Plantagenet king, and the coronation of Henry Tudor as Henry VII marked the end of a turbulent era and the dawn of a transformative period in English history. This final chapter explores the war's conclusion, the rise of the Tudors, and their lasting legacy in reshaping England. Richard III's reign, beginning in 1483, was marred by controversy. After the death of his brother, Edward IV, Richard declared his nephews, Edward V and his brother Richard, illegitimate, seizing the throne. The mysterious disappearance of the princes in the Tower, widely attributed to Richard, fueled distrust among nobles and commoners. Despite his administrative reforms and military acumen, Richard faced rebellions, including the failed Buckingham Uprising of 1483. His legitimacy was questioned, and his grip on power weakened as disaffected Yorkists and Lancastrians sought an alternative. Henry Tudor, a distant Lancastrian claimant, emerged as Richard's rival. Born in 1457, Henry's claim derived through his mother, Margaret Beaufort, a descendant of John of Gaunt. Exiled in Brittany and France, Henry cultivated support among Lancastrians and disillusioned Yorkists, including allies of the Woodville family. Backed by French troops and funds, he landed at Milford Haven, Wales, on August 7, 1485, with a force of about 5,000, rallying Welsh and English supporters as he marched toward Richard. The Battle of Bosworth Field, fought on August 22, 1485, in Leicestershire, was a decisive turning point. Richard III commanded a larger army, estimated at 8,000–10,000, bolstered by nobles like the Duke of Norfolk. Henry's smaller force relied on experienced commanders like the Earl of Oxford and the neutrality of the Stanley brothers, whose armies loomed as potential swing forces. The battle's outcome hinged on betrayal. Lord Stanley and his brother William, initially uncommitted, switched to Henry's side mid-battle, Richard, leading a desperate charge to kill Henry, was surrounded and killed, the last English king to die in combat. His death ended the Plantagenet line, with losses estimated at 1,000 for Richard's army and fewer for Henry's. Henry Tudor's victory led to his coronation as Henry VII on October 30, 1485, founding the Tudor dynasty. His marriage to Elizabeth of York, Edward IV's daughter, in January 1486, symbolized the union of Lancaster and York. The Tudor rose, combining red and white, became an enduring emblem of reconciliation, signaling an end to factional strife. This strategic marriage strengthened Henry's legitimacy, uniting rival claims and producing heirs to secure the dynasty. Henry VII's reign 1485-1509 was a masterclass in consolidating power. A shrewd and pragmatic ruler, he centralized authority, curbing the nobility's influence which had fueled the wars. He used the court of Star Chamber to enforce justice, targeting rebellious lords, and imposed bonds to ensure loyalty. Financial reforms, including efficient tax collection and trade promotion, restored the treasury depleted by decades of conflict. Henry's diplomacy, alliances with Spain and Scotland through marriages, secured peace, positioning England as a European power. The Tudor dynasty, cemented by Henry VII, produced iconic monarchs. Henry VIII's religious reforms and Elizabeth I's Golden Age defined England's early modern identity. The Tudors oversaw the transition from feudalism to a centralized state with stronger parliamentary roles and a burgeoning navy. The English Reformation, initiated by Henry VIII, reshaped religious and cultural life, while Elizabeth's reign saw exploration and literary flourishing, epitomized by Shakespeare. The Wars of the Roses left a profound cultural legacy. The conflict's drama, betrayals, battles, and dynastic intrigue inspired literature, notably Shakespeare's history plays like Richard III, which vilified Richard while glorifying Tudor triumph. The wars became a cautionary tale of division, reinforcing the value of unity under a strong monarchy. The Tudor rose, emblazoned on heraldry and architecture, symbolized England's resilience and renewal. Socially, the wars decimated the old nobility. Families like the Nevilles and Percys lost power, with estates redistributed to loyalists or new elites. This shift weakened feudal structures, empowering the gentry and merchant classes, who gained influence in parliament. The war's devastation, economic disruption, plundered lands, and displaced populations underscored the need for stability, which Henry VII provided through legal and administrative reform. Politically, the wars exposed the fragility of medieval kingship. The rapid shifts in power from Henry VI's deposition to Edward IV's restoration and Richard I's usurpation highlighted the monarchy's dependence on noble support. Henry VII's reign marked a shift toward absolutism, with monarchs asserting greater control over governance. His creation of the Privy Council and reliance on professional administrators set precedents for modern statecraft. The wars also reflected broader European trends. The decline of feudal levies, seen in battles like Towton, paralleled the rise of professional armies elsewhere. Gunpowder artillery, though limited, hinted at military evolution. The Tudors capitalized on these changes, building a navy that later defeated the Spanish Armada. England's isolation from continental wars under Henry VII allowed internal consolidation, preparing it for global ambitions. The Wars of the Roses were a transformative crucible. The conflict's brutality, massacres, executions, and betrayals reflected the stakes of power in a divided realm. Yet, it paved the way for a stronger, more unified England. The fall of the Plantagenets and rise of the Tudors marked the end of medieval chaos and the dawn of an early modern state. With centralized authority, cultural vibrancy, and global aspirations, the legacy of the Wars of the Roses endures in England's national identity. The conflict's lessons, unity over division, governance over anarchy, shaped the Tudor era and beyond. The war's drama continues to captivate, from historical accounts to modern adaptations, reminding us of the human cost and ambition behind the throne. In conclusion, the Wars of the Roses were more than a dynastic struggle. They were a pivotal moment that redefined England. Bosworth Field ended the bloodshed, and Henry VII's reign forged a new path, blending stability with ambition. The Tudor dynasty's rise marked the birth of a nation poised for greatness. Thank you for joining the War Vault on this journey through the Wars of the Roses. If you enjoyed this exploration of conflict and renewal, please like, share, and subscribe for more epic historical tales. Click the notification bell to stay updated. Until next time, keep exploring the past with us.